Hello and welcome to this webinar by the Migration Policy Institute Europe. Today we'll be discussing the topic of how can Europe address its labour market needs at a time of upheaval. My name is Kate Hooper. I'm a policy analyst with MPI, and I'm delighted to be joined here by four speakers who I will introduce momentarily. First, I'll begin with a housekeeping note. If you have any technical issues during this webinar, please use this email address, events@migrationpolicy.org, or call 202-266-1929, and we can help connect you. We will start with a panel discussion among the speakers, and then we will conclude with a Q&A with the audience. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during this discussion, please use the Q&A function or the chat function. Alternatively, you can email your question to events@migrationpolicy.org. We are recording this webinar, and audio from today's webinar will be available on our website, migrationpolicy.org/events. And we'd also like to commend to you a report that MPI published a couple of months ago on how can Europe deliver on the potential of talent partnerships. We'll be hearing more about the talent partnerships later today as we learn more about the European Commission's new skills and talent package. So to really begin by framing this conversation a little bit, today we're really going to be talking about a moment of remarkable turmoil for Europe's labour markets. There are two dynamics going on that we'll touch on today. First, as Europe emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen employers report challenges finding workers in sectors ranging from ICT to healthcare and social care to logistics to hospitality. Some of these needs predate the pandemic, for example, reflecting some of these big trends towards greater digitization or aging populations. And other needs seem to have been sharpened by the pandemic, including healthcare, of course, but also other areas like logistics too. These reported shortages raise a lot of interesting policy questions, which we'll dig into a little bit today. Which of these shortages require government intervention, and which shortages can we expect to gradually resolve by themselves? What tools can policymakers use to address these shortages? And how do you weigh different responses, like investing in education and training, promoting labour market participation, investing in automation, or expanding legal migration pathways and attracting immigrants with in-demand skills? This brings us on to the second dynamic that we'll be talking about today, which is the arrival of nearly 5 million Ukrainians in Europe over the last 2 months. This population offers huge potential for addressing some of Europe's pressing labour market needs. We know that among the adults, many hold university degrees, and some have experience in Ukraine's famed tech sector, for example. But we also know that from experience, labour market integration takes time, especially when people are recovering from the trauma of displacement and working out their next steps. It's important to set expectations about how quickly people will find work and where their profiles are likely to match with available jobs. I found the framing of the European Commission Skills and Talent Package, which was released yesterday, really helpful in this regard. They really make the case that Europe obviously needs to focus quickly on the task ahead for integrating Ukrainians into the labour market. But they also make a compelling case for why Europe still needs to lay the foundation for sustainable labour market policies, including, of course, labour migration policies that can help ensure the bloc's economic competitiveness. We'll hear shortly about the proposals set out in this package, including reforms to EU legislation, a new set of mobility schemes, and a proposed talent pool to help match employers and prospective workers. But I think this really illustrates the task for policymakers. On the one hand, focusing on these immediate labour market needs and how to get people into work, but on the other hand, keeping an eye on the future. Where will the jobs of the future be? Where will workers be? How can we train people and match them with opportunities? And where, of course, does immigration policy fit in? So on that note, I'm delighted to introduce our four speakers today. We're joined by Robert Plummer, the Senior Advisor for Business Europe's Social Affairs Department, Marcin Wiertrał, who's the Deputy Director for the Labour Market Department in Poland's Ministry of Family and Social Policy, Uwe Wusterhausen, who's from the Division of Immigration, Law and Humanitarian Admission in Germany's Federal Ministry of the Interior, and Luca Barani, who's the Policy Officer for Integration in DG Home in the European Commission. So I'll start this conversation by turning to Robert Plummer, whose schedule unfortunately means he needs to leave us a little early. So I'm going to turn it over to him shortly. Robert, perhaps you could kick off this conversation by telling us a little bit from the employer perspective, where are employers experiencing the most acute labour market needs at the moment? And to what extent do employers view migration as the means to address these shortages?
Many thanks, Kate, and thank you to MPI for the opportunity to give some reflections from Business Europe this afternoon, and already indeed apologies in advance that I'll need to drop out to get back to another meeting about halfway through. So yes, in terms of the needs that we see on the employer's side at the moment, I think actually I had a similar reflection, Kate, to what you introduced, I think, at the beginning, in terms of there being two perspectives. I think one is what was existing prior to COVID, when we had very pronounced shortages across a broad range of economic sectors, which stem to a fairly large extent from structural skills mismatches. And then secondly, also the skills and labour shortages that have become indeed more prominent as the COVID recovery has got underway. So I think looking at the first of those sets of needs, the most pronounced, I think, skills needs that we saw pre-COVID was very much in the realm of sort of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, those STEM skills that I think we're all broadly quite familiar with. Digital skills, of course, which links up to that as well. And the reason we would see those STEM skills in particular as being so important, and why they're always the sort of number one skill set that we have coming back from our members when we discuss this with them, is because to a good extent they are rather transversal skills. They're utilized across a number of occupational profiles, and that's why they're in such high demand, I think. And linked to that and feeding into it, of course, is also the established demand that we have for people with ICT skills, which at one stage I think was sort of progressively being addressed, but it still remains very prominent. And as I said, it's a long-standing structural demand, I think, that we see within the EU for people with that particular set of skills and in that occupational profile in particular. And then I think if we look at the current context now, there remains a strong demand, certainly for those skills that I've just mentioned. And in addition, I think COVID highlighted the sort of needs and shortages in some different sectors, and maybe ones that we were aware of, but which have become more prominent as a result of COVID. Healthcare, of course, is certainly an obvious one in the context of the pandemic. But as we started to exit the lockdown phase, and I think in particular sort of midway through last year, when the vaccines were really coming online and there was renewed confidence in opening up and getting the economy going, which obviously stimulated a greater demand for workers. We saw very quickly the need for lorry drivers in particular. I think that was evident across a number of member states. And this was also a need that existed when we talked to the sectoral employers in the transport sector. They've been saying for a while that there was just a shortage of drivers. And I think that really, again, spiked during lockdown, when we, of course, had a much greater reliance on online shopping, home deliveries, and that's continued to a great extent as habits have changed as a result of COVID, as we now move to the phase of sort of living with COVID. And then the hospitality sector, again, Kate, you touched upon it in your introduction, but this is also one where it's very much, of course, we saw a rapid drop in demand for workers in this sector when we went into the lockdowns. There was then an equally rapid, I think, demand for workers again as the restrictions started to ease. sometimes with relatively short notice, so there wasn't really much opportunity for employers in the sector to really plan and recruit workers. But equally, again, I think there was a bit of a mind shift change among workers who maybe previously worked in that sector, who maybe went to short-time working or made redundant or put on extended leave during the lockdown. So they maybe looked for, or started to look for, more secure, more stable forms of employment. And I think we also hear feedback that, again, in terms of mind shift change, that maybe people don't want to necessarily work that sort of out of hours type of jobs anymore, when quite a lot of work or tasks to a certain extent have shifted to online, as we're doing now and working from home today. Some jobs, of course, it's easier than others. But I think there has been quite a process of retraining among the workforce, looking at new jobs, new opportunities, and this is all contributing to a bit of a shortage of workers in hospitality, as we see it at the moment as well. I think touching on the role of migration, certainly, of course, I have to start with it because we're in a migration-related discussion, but we very much see it as an important and complementary tool. I say complementary because it's not, of course, in isolation. We need to look at other labour market and education and training policies at the same time. I think if we look at migration, absolutely we need to strengthen the EU's economic migration policy in a way that is more effective, perhaps, in attracting and retaining skilled third country nationals. And when I say skilled, I mean people of all skill levels, so not only the highly skilled. And again, as you alluded to, this discussion today is very timely because it's just the day after the publication of the skills and talent package, which again is something that we very much welcome. In particular, the elements there in relation to the EU talent pool, this sort of European level matching approach, online platform, to really try to attract and match skilled third country nationals with job opportunities in the EU. So we see a lot of potential in that, and the context around how it was presented in the communication yesterday is very encouraging to us. So we will certainly be contributing to that, I think, as we go forward. And then just lastly, on the complementary policies, as said, it's important to improve the alignment of education and training systems and programs with the actual needs that we see on the labour markets. For example, through the better alignment of, or the involvement, sorry, of employers in feeding into the process of defining curricula. We also see at the moment that there's quite a sizable inactive population in member states, so it's important to try to mobilize that sort of segment of society through active labour market policies, which of course can also include up and reskilling, which can relate to the sorts of skills needs that we see employers have. So certainly very much a role for migration, but in complement with a sort of broader approach to other employment and education and training policies as well. So that's where I would leave it for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. That's a really helpful overview. I think that you articulate nicely how immigration policy needs to happen in consort with other investments, whether that's in facilitating labour market participation, investing in education and training, as you said. If I could ask you just a very quick follow-up question before I go to our next speaker. To what extent are the employers that you're working with looking towards the newly arrived Ukrainian population in Europe as a solution to some of these labour market needs that you've set out? And are there any experiences from sort of past immigration to Europe that you would apply here in terms of labour market integration?
Yeah, I think obviously something we're very, very much working on and looking into with our members as well at the moment. I think firstly, very encouraging the piloting of the talent pool that I mentioned, the proposal from the Commission to pilot that with Ukrainian refugees and to have something online, hopefully by the summer. I think that's a really positive step, not only for the here and now with the Ukrainian refugees, but also for the broader development of the pool during the course of next year and the proposal that will come for that. There's certainly a strong openness and willingness from our member federations and companies also to try to support the labour market integration of Ukrainian refugees, to provide training, to provide language learning opportunities, which of course would be crucial, and to see what sort of job openings would be available. I think a couple of caveats on that. Of course, it's the demographic of the Ukrainians. It's predominantly women and children, so maybe different to previous large influxes of refugees, for example, that we saw with the Syrian situation. We need to still have a better understanding, I think, of the extent to which the women that are coming in, what sort of skills levels they have. We've had sort of conflicting feedback from our members in different member states, in some cases very well qualified, in some cases not so well qualified. So it's also about understanding what pre-existing experience and qualifications they have and how that can relate to the sort of jobs that are available. There's also issues around childcare, depending on the age of the children that the women might be traveling with. Also, their readiness to go into work, I think, is a question that's also come up at the moment as well. And then also lastly, I think the desire that there is maybe among the refugees to stay in the EU. Of course, we don't know how long the conflict will last. We hope not long, but we simply don't know at the moment. Also, what the infrastructure and the situation will be in Ukraine in terms of what is the scenario when things settle down, hopefully. So I think we heard, for example, from our Polish member organization, and I'll finish with this, that in a survey they'd done of Ukrainian refugees in Poland, that 79% have the intention of returning to Ukraine, and that they don't really see a long-term or medium-term even perspective in terms of staying in the EU. So this does raise, I think, while there's a strong openness and willingness, not only from the European institutions, national institutions, from companies, from employers to try to facilitate the labour market integration, I think we also need to be aware that there are some quite big question marks on whether certain segments, at least, of these refugees really want to or have that perspective that they want to integrate into the labour market, because they maybe have the mindset that they'll be able to go home in the rather short term. So again, as said, we need to see how things evolve, but it's not so clear-cut at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And as we've mentioned Poland, I will turn now to Marcin to get his perspectives from Poland. Perhaps, Marcin, you could talk a little bit first about sort of prior to the war in Ukraine, where Poland was experiencing labour shortages and why. And then we can turn on to talk a little bit about whether this question of labour market matching, whether some of the new arrivals are matching with current job vacancies in Poland. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Good afternoon. Good afternoon for all. Thank you for the invitation and opportunity to present Polish experience. Before the war in Ukraine, the demand for migrant workers in Poland was in strong upward trend. I think that COVID did not reverse this trend, although in the first months of the pandemic, the number of foreigners insured in Polish system of social insurance decreased from 70,000 up to approximately 600,000. Later, dynamic growth began. Today, the number of the insured is nearly 1 million. So in slightly above 1 year, we have gained 400,000 new foreigners in our system of social insurance. Between 2013 and 2022, the estimated share of migrants in Polish labor market have increased from, I think, below 1% to now, I think, above 6%, maybe even 7%. But in some sectors and occupation, it may be well above 2 or even 20%, maybe in construction, especially in agriculture, where the share in some subsectors of agriculture, the share of foreign workers was, I think, nearly 100%. The vast majority of migrants working in Poland, we can divide into two groups: unskilled jobs and skilled manual jobs. The first groups consisted of foreigners working in agriculture, logistics, magazines, cleaning, maybe also in part of care, something like that. The second group, I mean skilled manual workers, consist among others of foreigners working as truck drivers, machine operators in construction, industry, and so on. In the recent years, we can see that share of second group have increased and the first is decreased. There is also relatively small third group, below, I think, 5%, and on a relatively stable level. I mean, this third group is specialists, especially in IT sector, but also maybe in some kind of engineering, also in outsourcing of business services. Relatively big, we can observe also before the war, relatively big share of men. I think that nearly 60% of all foreigners working in Poland were men. Relatively big share of women has worked before the war, of course, in care sectors, in retail, as cleaners, but also in agriculture, food processing, and magazines. Maybe answering also the first question, there is a quite interesting question we can pose analyzing situation in Poland, whether this relatively big share of foreigners working in relatively poor educated sector, relatively unskilled jobs will be challenging for our long-term perspective of economic development. I mean, it will be prevent, for example, employers from investing in automation, digitalization, or not. I think, of course, there are many other questions, but I think it is one of the interesting questions. So I stop here.
Thank you, Marcin. This is a really interesting overview of some of the labour market conditions that you see in Poland. And as you said, there's an emphasis on low-skilled labour needs in some sectors. So to turn now to the conflict, it'd be very interesting to hear from you just a couple of minutes on, to what extent you're able to match some of the new arrivals with existing opportunities in Poland's labour market, and some of the steps that the government is taking to facilitate that matching process.
About half of refugees from Ukraine are children. More than 90% adults are women. Of course, it is very challenging because of, as I said, the domination of masculine profession before the war. There are, of course, some other challenges as language barriers, access to childcare, and recognition of qualification. Poland has adopted special law on helping Ukrainians relatively quickly on 12 March. The support provided by this act was relatively comprehensive, including behind labor, also child and social allowances, cash for people accommodating Ukrainians, special funds on central and regional level, and I think many others. Regarding labor market, we practically prepare free access to labor market for all Ukrainians, not only new arrivals, but also for already staying in Poland, and also free access to register in our public employment services. So now, since 12 March, we have 100,000 of Ukrainians working in this free access scheme. Let's say 75% of them are women. Most of them working in similar sector like before war, but with the domination of restaurants, cleaning, hotels, something like that, but also food processing, magazines. Maybe some novelty is that some, especially women, are now working in school as a teachers, what is of course totally understandable. What we have done also, we one of the important challenge in Poland is coordination of our network of 340 local employment services, because they are governed by self-governments on local level. We have also created special program. We very quickly, I think, in the second day of war, we have created program for foreigners. At the initial stage of creating this program, we think more on other than Ukrainians foreigners, especially Afghan refugees, whose Poland was adopted in August 2021, but now is totally devoted to helping Ukrainian people. Okay, maybe I'll stop here. If you have
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah.
This is a very helpful overview, and I would commend the audience to ask any questions in the Q&A function, or you can also use the chat function as well. So, mindful of time, I'm going to turn over now to Roy Westerhausen to speak a little bit about Germany's perspective on these issues. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about this question of the extent to which new arrivals from Ukraine can help address some of the pressing labour shortages that Germany is currently contending with, and sort of, again, what steps the government's taking to facilitate this job matching.
Yes, good afternoon from Berlin. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you to speak on these important topics. Let me first of all maybe say that, of course, and I think we all agree, the war is in Ukraine is a humanitarian catastrophe. It is crucial that the EU and the allies stand together in facing all questions concerning the situation, also when it comes to migration questions. And we are really grateful that so far we've seen a lot of solidarity between EU member states and acting together. This was really good, and I think we should continue to work like this. Now, are the new arrivals of Ukraine in Germany a solution to our problem with labor shortages? Well, it's a hard question. I think many aspects were already said. They're similar in Poland, and what Mr. Plummer already said. It's true. Our labor market is has many shortages, so there are many open job positions for skilled workers. And it is also true that from what we see, many of the new arrivals of Ukraine are qualified. Let me put it like this. I mean, I don't have a complete comprehensive survey on this, but this is our impression that many Ukrainians that arrive here are highly qualified and could, of course, take up a job. And what is good in comparison also to maybe to the migration situation that we faced in 2015 and 16, that now in Germany we opened the labor market immediately for the new arrivals, so they are allowed to take up any job, basically, if of course certain conditions are fulfilled when it comes to the profession. But the general rule is that the labor market is open. So this is a good thing. But we have to see, of course, that people are that arrive here, they didn't come with the intention to work. Of course, I mean, they fled from war, they might be traumatized, and not they have their children here, and you know, daycare has to be organized, school has to be organized, many questions that arise. I think all of us try to work day and night at the moment, I would say, on these questions to make possible what is possible. And of course, there are many who say, okay, I want to work and I need to do something. There might be others who can't work, who, you know, fear for their loved ones back home in Ukraine and can't even concentrate. There are language questions, of course. Often you need German ability or German language ability to work in certain positions here. Yeah, so this is those are the questions that we face. You already asked, I think, if I remember well, the job matching situation. Yeah, in general, we have a very formalized labor market, I would say, in Germany. So employers look if you have a certain qualification, formal qualification. So and this usually has to be recognized formally in Germany. At least this is one of the conditions for skilled workers to come here to work in Germany. Now, this would of course work because this would mean a lot of long administrative procedures and so on. So the solution at the moment that the colleagues work on is that we have kind of a self-assessment of the Ukrainians. So if you want to fill the database for job matching opportunities, the Ukrainian refugees are asked to self-assess what are their abilities and what do they think they know and so on, and a formal recognition procedure can be done afterwards. So this is, I think, one part of the thing that we work on now to kind of match employers and possible employees.
Thank you, Uwe. That's a very helpful overview of some of the accommodations that have been made, and also, again, sort of echoing some of the integration challenges that policymakers are going to have to navigate, even as we sort of address that first part, which is the actual access to the labour market itself. So if I could ask you, sort of bringing us back again to the skills and talent package that we've seen that set out these new ideas for labour migration, I'm curious to hear your perspective on Germany's immigration policies at the moment. I know that the Ukraine crisis comes, I think, a full 2 years after Germany overhauled its Skilled Immigration Act to make it easier to admit skilled immigrants. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how well this system's working. You know, does Germany have any plans for future reforms in the pipeline? And where do you see the EU sort of playing a complementary role to some of those national initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for this question. Yeah, when it comes to national legislation, of course, there was this Skilled Worker Migration Act in 2000 that entered into force. I think, yeah, 1st of March 2020 was a huge thing, and I would say. And yeah, we kind of were not lucky with the timing, I would say, because the coronavirus pandemic just came up basically, I don't know, 2 weeks after the legal act entered into force. So even now, it's probably too early to say if it's, you know, the successful piece of legislation. We don't have the impression that it is not. Let me maybe say it like this, because, well, of course, the numbers in 2020 went down considerably when it comes to visa applications, but already we have seen the numbers for 2021 now. They go considerably up again. So opening up the labor market, what we did, and accelerating administrative procedures and a lot of complementary actions that were taken. I think they work, but due to the pandemic, some action couldn't be taken. For instance, when it comes to advertising jobs in the EU or Germany abroad in potentially interesting or countries that are interesting for us, where there are a lot of skilled workers who might be interested in working abroad. So yeah, I think we have to strengthen our efforts. So we don't have the evaluation yet, but our impression is that we have a good piece of legislation, and that we have to fill it with life, so that people are really interested in migrating to Germany. The legal provisions, in many cases, they won't be the problem, I think. But nevertheless, we have a new government, a new coalition treaty. Yeah, we want to get better even when it comes to legislation point, and there, yeah, we want to install a point system, but not as a completely new system. I think our system, as we have it, works fine. We can always get better, but as a second pillar, we will install a point system to attract, probably for job seekers. It's still under discussion, and so it will be a complex thing to do. But this is the goal that we have. And maybe last point, yeah, labor migration is always national legislation and EU legislation. Of course, we welcome the skills and talents package that was published. We are still examining it, and the last important piece of legislation was, of course, the blue card directive that was adopted, I think in October or November last year, and we are going to implement it, and we'll have interesting discussions nationally how to use the leeway that we have, and so on. So yeah, I think as a result, having national legislation and EU legislation together is a good thing, and we think we should go on in this way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uwe. We'll stay tuned for further news on the point system. I'm glad to hear that you guys are moving forward with implementing the Blue Card Directive. This brings me over to Luca Borani from the European Commission, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the skills and talent package that we keep referring back to. So Luca, I will turn the floor over to you to take us through this new proposal and what it entails.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. So yes, the proposal of the Commission on the skills and talent package is quite recent because it was presented just yesterday. So I don't expect that anybody at the time to go through this. But just to mention, it's true that a revision of the EU Blue Card Directive was adopted last October. So currently we are in the transposition period for the EU Blue Card, and of course the skills and talent package is complementary to this already revised directive on the EU Blue Card. And I also would like to mention that both Poland and Germany are the two member states that are the most they're putting to the most use the blue card according to the latest statistics. So there are the two countries that are at least in quantitative terms are making the most use of the EU Blue Card. But just to move now to the skills and talent package, it was presented yesterday. It's quite a complex package. So there is mainly composed by three elements: a communication, where we detail also the future actions that we're going to take on the legal migration aspect. But the two main important items are the recast, so the revision of two directives, of the long-term residence directive and of the single permit directive. Next slide, please. And so in the communication, we are developing the case why it's important to revise the framework for legal migration. This is not something that it was done overnight. It's part of revision of the legal migration framework, which took place since 2019 with a fitness check. So we revised all the directives that are pertaining to the legal migration, and the single permit and the long-term residence directives. There were the two directives that were identified together with the blue card directives as in need of being revised. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the legislative pillar of the package, the recast of the long-term residence directive and of the single permit directive, which are accompanied by an operational pillar, talent partnership, which has not to be confused with the talent pool and this pilot initiative for people fleeing the war in Ukraine. And there is also a forward-looking pillar, which is looking at 3 priority areas where we still need to explore opportunities and possibility of going forward. But the more concrete steps that we are taking in the near future is the legislative pillar and the revision of the long-term of the 2 directives, which are accompanied by the operational on talent partnership and talent pool. Next slide, please. So I will, in the interest of time, I will not enter into details of the recast of the long-term residence. So next slide. Neither of the single permit directive. Next slide, thank you. So this part of the operational pillar, we will try to strike bilateral agreements with priority countries already before the end of this year, which is quite ambitious, which is trying exactly to address labor market skills needing both in the member state, but also with these partner countries. Next slide. But we are also looking forward beyond these the initial steps that we are going to take by end of 2022. So we are assessing also the possibility, the opportunity to start a discussion with further countries, but this, of course, is beyond 2022. Is going for the far future. Next slide. So together with the talent partnership, which are bilateral agreements with fair countries, we also are considering developing an EU talent pool, which was referred to, it was mentioned several times already. So the talent pool for EU-wide is, of course, a very complex platform that we are considering, which is going to take time, and the formal launch is forecast for mid-2023, but because of the pressures, because of the urgencies due to the Ukraine situations, we already start by the summer of this year, so by summer 2022, with a pilot initiative. So for people fleeing the war in Ukraine, because we already heard both from colleagues in Warsaw or in Berlin that there is a need to map the skills of people fleeing the war, and this is going to be coupled with the fact that these are people that are going to be registered as beneficiaries of the temporary protection directive. So this is the, so to speak, is the first step that they have to make in order to enter in this pilot initiative for Ukraine. But this pilot initiative for Ukraine is not going to just remain there for this time of crisis. We hope that is going to help us developing a EU talent pool for other people, for other countries, for other nationals. And these criteria and qualifications are going to be developed later on, after the pilot initiative for Ukraine. But is important to stress that the pilot initiative is a first step, and we'll see how this develops, but it could have a medium-term, long-term positive lessons to be learned in order to develop a EU-wide talent pool. So we try to combine the necessity to meet the current emergencies, but also with a more forward-looking perspective. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what about the really forward-looking perspective? We are going to look at certain of the priorities that we already mentioned, for instance, by Business Europe. The need to attract long-term care workers from non-EU countries, also facilitating the mission of startup founders at the EU level. This is going to be for further down in the future, so more in the medium term. But so even if we, with this package, we try to focus on the current emergencies and the current needs, we also try to take a kind of long view, and so this all part of the package, which, as I already said, is a kind of very complex and very articulated package of many different initiatives, which for time being, I mean, the first steps that you are going to see concretely is going to be the pilot project, the pilot talent pool for Ukraine. But behind that, as I try to convey this, also there are so many other different measures that are going to be developed in the short term, in the medium term, but in the further term. Next slide. So I'm happy now to answer to any questions that you have. I was quite quick, but I understand that because we have to wrap up by 5, I didn't have the leisure to go through all the different steps and details, but I'm happy to answer all the questions that you can have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luca. You did an amazing job of running through an entire communication in just a few minutes. So thank you so much. This has been really informative. So I have a couple of questions coming through on the Q&A, and please do keep submitting any questions that occur among the audience. The first is about recognition of qualifications, and I might turn to both Uwe and Luca on this question. Uwe, there's a question here about how qualification recognition for Ukrainian professional work. Is it employers who assess skills, or do you require German certifications for that to work? So perhaps you could start by answering that question, and then I may turn it over to Luca to talk a little bit more broadly about what the Commission is doing on qualification recognition, since this is a theme that's come up in the interventions today about a key barrier.
Yes, Kate, hi. The question on recognition, sorry for that. Complicated. As far as I understood, there are different things going on in this very complex situation. I mean, we have regulated professions and non-regulated professions, but in general, the idea is that you have a self-assessment of the Ukrainian refugee, and I don't know, I think they are still working on the concept how it should work and what questions they probably should answer, and what probably database, as far as I know, it will be filled with this information. And then at the end, you would have the Federal Employment Agency, as far as I understand it, but I will have to ask my colleagues to have certain, an answer that is sure. But then they will see what offers are there by employers, and they will have the other database and to check what profiles are there of people who might match the needs. But this is all still under construction, and I don't want to give definite thing. But the basic idea is that we don't have a formal qualification procedure at the moment, but to allow for the self-assessment and try to make matchings there, and then afterwards to go if someone wants to stay and wants to have a residence title for a skilled worker, then to have this formal qualification procedure.
Thank you, Uwe. Martin, do you want to jump in at all on the qualification thing? Otherwise, I will pass it over to Luca to talk about the EU level.
Okay, I can jump into this question. In Poland, I think in the most of professions there is a matter of employer to assess the qualification of foreigners, but in case of regulated profession, there is need to somehow officially recognize the qualification. As I said in my first intervention, I think that in Poland the system of recognition qualification is a challenge for development of migration channels in Poland. I think it's far away from this solution, as we know from Germany. Our system is quite dispersed, is quite complicated, and as I said, we can say that it is one of the highest barrier now in Poland. But in our special act, as I said, we have introduced some solutions in the health sector. I think for the teachers, we also provide in our public employment services instrument enabling to finance the process of recognition of qualification for not only for Ukrainians but for all registered foreigners in our public employment services. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcin. And Luca, perhaps you could step in and talk a little bit about the actions that the EU can take, especially for those regulated professions that are already subject to directives in Europe.
Yes, indeed. The European Commission is preparing a recommendation to the intention of member states on the issue of recognition of professional qualifications, but specifically for Ukrainians. So this is in preparation and is mostly in relation to the internal market functioning. So I cannot anticipate when this is going to get out, but this definitely something that the European Commission is going to propose. I would like also to stress that for people fleeing the war in Ukraine, there is, of course, the issue of recognition of professional qualifications, but there is also the issue of recognition of academic qualifications. With some, to a certain extent, it can be also related. The issue there, of course, is that the Ukrainian academic system is not so close to the European one or of the many different member states. So this is also a part of the challenge in terms of the recognition of professional or academic qualifications. But definitely on the issue of professional qualifications, the European Union is going to make some recommendations that are going to be specific to the situation of people fleeing the war from Ukraine.
Thank you, Luca. That's very interesting to hear. I'm just scrolling through our Q&A. We have another question for you, Luca, about the talent partnerships that will be launched with the Northern African countries by the end of 2022. The question is, which skill levels and job sectors are being targeted so far? And can you speak to the scope of the talent partnerships and their format? Will they be bilateral agreements, partner countries, or time-bound projects supported by the EU?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So what we commit ourselves as Commission is to start to open the discussion with the 3 countries that were mentioned. We don't plan to finish and to have these bilateral agreements in place by the end of this year, because clearly it would not be realistic to say so. So we are going to launch the discussions and possibly negotiations with the countries. So it will depend on each bilateral process concerning what is going to be the scope, what is going to be the level of skills that are going to be part of the discussion, meaning that because we want to discuss and to have a serious negotiation with the countries, we will try to be careful not to increase or worsen the situation in terms of brain drain. This clearly something that we don't want to worsen the situation in terms of brain drain for the countries concerned. Also, as I said before, this package comes after the revision of the EU blue card. The EU blue card is definitely and clearly for high-skilled professionals, because this is the profile that is covered by the EU blue card. So we are also, of course, going to take into account that there is different instruments for high-skilled workers to be attracted and to be retained in the for the EU, knowing that the blue card is still directive is in transposition. So we don't know now how member states are going to implement the directive on the blue card. I hope to have answered to the question.
Yes, thank you. We understand that it's still a bit of an ongoing negotiation. One follow-up question that's just come through on talent partnerships. So you mentioned in your presentation that the skills and talent package is really emphasizing safeguards for workers and protection from labor exploitation. Could you perhaps just provide a little bit of detail quickly on what that entails, both in the context of the talent partnerships and other reforms in the talent package?
Yes, I unmute myself to answer the question. So, of course, I mean, we have to distinguish between the talent partnership, which are bilateral. And so, again, as I said, there's going to be country-specific arrangements depending on how the discussions and hopefully the negotiations are going with each of this country. In terms of safeguards and guarantees that third country nationals coming to the European Union for labor migration reasons are not exploited is really part of the long-term residence of the recast of the two directives. And in this respect, we also need to work with employers. We need to work with trade unions as well, in order to not only to put these guarantees in place, but also to invigilate them and to monitor that the guarantees that we put in place are not bypassed or are not respected by all the different actors in the labor market. But the guarantees and the safeguards are mostly in the revision of the directives. And here again, I have to stress that this is the proposal of the Commission. How this is going to be the final shape, the final guarantees and safeguards are really up to both to the European Parliament and to the member states in the process of negotiations, which we don't expect to go quickly, but of course the European Commission is going to accompany its proposals in order to maintain the balance, at least what is currently in the proposals, but it's not up to the Commission to decide what are going to be the final guarantees and the final safeguards that are going to be adopted at the end of the process.
Thank you, Luca. I take your point that this is a sort of beginning of negotiations, but it's nonetheless promising to see these questions about protecting migrant workers being elevated in the proposal itself. So I'm aware that we're now at 5 p.m. European time, and I can't believe how quickly this discussion has gone. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of the questions in the Q&A. We really did try to cover as many as the time allotted, but these things do race through quite quickly. We will be posting an audio and video recording of this webinar on our website tomorrow. And as you can see, if there are any reporters on the call, they can contact my colleague, Michelle Middlestat. Her contact details are available there. And you can also see a link to a paper that we wrote on the talent partnerships a couple of months ago with support from ASAPI. But thank you really to everyone. Thank you first and foremost to our speakers for being so generous with your time and answering all of our questions. And thank you for the audience for your engagement and for your smart questions as well. Thank you again and have a good afternoon.